vice president and the social media and outreach and everything. So if you want to volunteer, let me know. We have several upcoming meetings. We have the third Tuesdays in Cherry Hill at Sakura Spring on Route 70. They meet on October 20th. There's a new meeting we just started in Voorhees, New Jersey. It's the first Sunday brunch, and brunch is optional. You can come from 12:30 to 1:30 for brunch, and then the DVAU meeting starts from 1:30 till 2:30 or 3, whenever we're done talking. I'm trying to find people in Philadelphia who will host similar meetings in the city for the chapter. So we're still working on that. We won't be meeting there in the first Sunday in December because that is our very special year-end event. It is 10th anniversary of the Kitzmiller versus Dover intelligent design case. And it's hard to believe it's been 10 years since that went to court and we won. So we're having a day-long event at Hugh's building, the Ethical Society of Ethical Humanism Society of Philadelphia at Rittenhouse Square. Tickets are $30. They include lunch. The day starts at 11. Lunch at noon. We decorate the Tree of Knowledge. The lunch starts at 1 p.m. The $30 tickets include lunch, afternoon speakers, a cash bar with $5 wine and champagne, and happy hour closing ceremony with finger foods, music, and a celebration cake, and photo ops with our authors who will be there selling their books as we decorate the Tree of Knowledge with book covers of the knowledge we wish to impart to everyone during the holiday season. If you don't want to do the entire day, you can skip the lunch, and we have $15 tickets, so you can enjoy the afternoon speakers and the happy hour. And that starts at 2:30 p.m. We have several lawyers who work on the case will be speaking, and Lori Lebo, the journalist who covered the case, is also one of our speakers. And tickets are on sale on our website, dvau.org, or you can see me if you don't want to buy them online, and we'll work something out. We have a meeting here next month. It'll be the last meeting of our fall 2015 session. Thursday, November 5th, we welcome Jonathan Engel, son of Stephen Engel, presenting his talk, Engel versus Vitale and the Separation of Church and State. Jonathan's late father, Stephen Engel, was one of the plaintiffs in the landmark Supreme Court case, Engel versus Vitale, 1962, where the court held that organized prayers in public schools were an impermissible violation of the Constitution's Establishment Clause. So we are scheduled to be in room 405, and hopefully we can break into 406 and have more seating. We expect a lot of people to be there. I'll be tabling Outfest in the Neighborhood this Sunday. If anyone goes to visit the Gay Festival, DVAU will be there, and we'll be taking pictures for our Protect Thy Neighbor project. As you can see, we have some shields over there, and AU's new project, Protect Thy Neighbor, where we say that we stand for equality, fairness, and religious freedom. We believe that religion is no excuse to harm others. And we're asking people to put statements of why they want to protect their neighbor. And we have some different statements people have used, or suggested statements you can use here. Say, I believe in equal rights. I believe people should be treated fairly. We took pictures of people at South Jersey Pride, and they wrote, love is love, God is love, all different things. Personal relationships, our kids love each other, healthcare, marriage, for LGBT couples. There's a bunch of different reasons you can put on there. And we're taking pictures, and they will be posted on the Protect Thy Neighbor website. We're asking people to put your name or your hashtag or your Twitter handle on there.
It takes a little while for it to come.
Okay, thank you very much. So if we have time to do that after tonight, I have the shields, I have the dry erase shields and the little paper ones. And also the new issue of Church and State magazine is out, and we have that as well. So that's the end of the announcements. Let me get to our speaker tonight. We are very delighted to have a member of DVAU's Clergy Advisory Board, Hugh Taft-Morales. Let me give you his bio. He was born and raised in Connecticut. Hugh Taft-Morales graduated from Yale University in 1979 and earned a master's in philosophy from University of Kent at Canterbury. He taught philosophy and history for 25 years in Washington, D.C., after which he transitioned into ethical culture leadership. In Society of Philadelphia and the Baltimore Ethical Society. He serves as Secretary of the National Leaders Council of the American Ethical Union and is editor of the AEU's Ethical Action Report. Hugh lives in Tacoma Park, Maryland with his wife Maureen, a Latin American analyst for the Congressional Research Service. They have 3 wonderful children, Sean 28, Maya 23, and Justin 20. Hugh's hobbies include yoga, singing and playing guitar, and watching way too much sports. We should have a whole other meeting on that. Okay, and now may I present Hugh Taft-Morales.
Thanks, Janice, very much. So I've got a lot of information and I think great little quotes and arguments to make when you're arguing for separation of church and state. So my cards are here, and if you want the text, I can email it to you. You just tell me that because it's down here. I'm going to edit it a little bit though because, well, yeah, cut the fat from the bone. So I'm going to start with a quote from Senator Robert Taft, not exactly a liberal. He said, "The whole basis of the American Constitution is complete separation of church and state. It is not necessary to review the reasons for this." I know. It's too bad that it is necessary to review the reason for that, but that's in the 50s. I think it was a done deal. People sort of accepted it. And so this is really a product of the 80s. I mean, this was the man nicknamed Mr. Republican. But for him, this division between the civic and religious worlds was a sacred division. And so this is something that I think we need to revive to a degree. It's not something that just liberals should get involved with. What are we talking about? The phrase from the Constitution is, "Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of a religion, nor prohibiting the free exercise of." And those two parts of the phrase, law respecting establishment and free exercise, are both very important, but they're different. So what does it mean? Certainly, the government can't establish a religion. That's one thing. It also has to protect the free exercise of religion. But it also claims that it has to remain neutral between the religions. Now, most people will agree with all of that, but it also, according to certain court cases and experts, it has to be neutral between religion and non-religion. And that's often forgotten. So, for example, a lot of times, Scotty, a lot of times you'll see people say, "Oh, well, it's an interdenominational prayer," or something, or it's a non-denominational prayer. But that still takes the side of religion over non-religion, so that's an issue. Now, one of the magical things about the Constitution, certainly, is that it honors many ideals, even when those ideals contradict. And that's something that I think people have to accept more of. Good law is a balancing act. It's not always clear. So there's this important tension regarding religion. So in order to ensure the free exercise of religion, we created a system that inhibits government meddling through taxation. I mean, you know the phrase Chief Justice Marshall said, that the power to tax is the power to destroy. That was considered the main tool of government power when the government was founded, because that was one of the reasons why the revolution occurred, all the taxes that Britain was laying on the colonies. So some say that the religious tax exemption violates the government's claimed neutrality between the religious and the non-religious. Why do they get tax breaks? I don't think the solution is to start taxing churches, mosques, synagogues, and ethical societies. So, okay, I do have a stake in the game here. But I do think that the power to tax institutions would open the door to further meddling of the government into issues that are deeply personal, which is why that division was made and why the taxation power was denied the government over religions. So they get special tax status in exchange, however, for remaining out of partisan arguments. That's the deal. That's what you're being paid for, basically. You trade away unrestrained political activism in exchange for freedom from government coercion through taxation. So when the IRS looks into churches, it's not that they have a particular problem, it's that there was a deal cut, and the deal's being violated. So this is, I think, important to realize that it's not a blank check given to places of worship. There is a trade-off there. Now, the Ethical Humanist Society and the American Ethical Union has been involved in various, I just want to mention this before I sort of get into some of the history, but we've been involved in a lot of court cases involving this, being friends of the court. In 1962, we passed a resolution saying that it was, quote, firmly opposed to any breaching of the constitutional law of the separation of church and state. In 1967, the board supported non-believers claiming conscientious objection to military service, demanding that the Selective Service Act no longer define religion as being belief in a supreme being. In other words, that's the only reason you could be a conscientious objector, is that you believe in the supreme being. So it disallowed Unitarians and Buddhists, Confucians, and ethical culturists from claiming conscientious objector status. In the 1980s, the AU opposed, quote, the use of government funds and lands for erection of religious holiday symbols. In '83, it condemned the frightening remarks of our President Reagan, who said, I don't know if any of you remember, when I read this, I was like amazed. He said that the U.S. is compelled by Scripture and the Lord Jesus Christ to oppose Russia with all military and political means. That's terrifying. That's terrifying. But he said it. So humanists have to use reason to counteract these ridiculous arguments and the twisted logic that describes the separation of the civic and religious worlds as a conspiracy against religion. The right wing frames things so well, and they frame the separation of churches and state quite often as a conspiracy against religion. One of my favorite bigots, Jesse Helms, said years ago, when the U.S. Supreme Court prohibited children from participating in voluntary prayers in public schools, the conclusion is inescapable that the Supreme Court not only violated the free exercise of religion for all Americans, it also established a religion of the United States, the religion of secular humanism. Now that's part of this sort of Alice in Wonderland upside-down logic that's being used. So for decades, defending the wall of separation has been mischaracterized, really the last 4 decades, as being something that left-wing activists are involved as being anti-religious and anti-God. And that should be corrected. So my thesis today is that this wall of separation is really good for all, for religious institutions and for civic government, for the theists and the humanists. And I think we should be able to argue that when confronted with these ridiculous statements. So churches, mosques, temples, and ethical societies who believe in the Constitution can combine with secularists and atheists who believe in the rule of law. And that's what I think we need to do more of, and not get these red herring arguments that get us pulled off. So you can go back to colonial time, when the pious Puritans agreed with the separation of church and state, as well as the secular Virginians, who really didn't care that much about the church. They were there to make money. Carl Degler, one of my favorite historians, said that they put the amendment, the First Amendment, out there to protect against religious threats, quote, to the purity and freedom of the state. So it was to protect the state from government. But the Puritans believed it was to protect the religion from the government as well. Sorry, vice versa, you get what I mean. Both arguments were being made. George Washington was sensitive to many, many minorities in the country when it began, especially in the northern and middle colonies. He was tolerant of Catholics. He was involved in praising the pluralism of this state, Pennsylvania. He wrote warm letters to Jewish congregations and acknowledged also that the Universalist Church was legitimate when John Murray landed on the shores of Jersey. All of these things were very public statements. These were not under-the-table things. He praised this in letters. Both Washington and Jefferson supported Baptist demands for the independence of religion, and they hoped to avoid this intolerant persecution that was so obvious in Europe and led to a lot of people coming to this country. So James Madison as well said, the purpose of separation of church and state is to keep forever from these shores the ceaseless strife that has soaked the soil of Europe in blood for centuries. He said he knew that, quote, practical distinctions between religion and civil government is essential to the purity of both. I'm not proud to say that my state, Connecticut, was the last state to give up an official state religion. It took a while. It had an official religion on the books. In fact, Yale was founded in Connecticut because Harvard was too liberal. So there's the Jefferson rejoiced when the Congregational Church actually was finally de-established in 1818. And he said, quote, the resurrection of Connecticut to light and liberty, he said, he actually in a letter to Adams said, that this den of priesthood is at length, he congratulated Adams saying that the den of priesthood is at length broken up, and that the Protestant popedom is no longer to disgrace American history and character. It was 1818, and that's still. Fast forward to this century, Sandra Day O'Connor came out many times defending church and state. She said, those who would renegotiate the boundaries between church and state must therefore answer a difficult question. Why would we trade a system that has served us so well for one that has served others so poorly? That's a great, great quote, I think. Hugo Black said that a union of government and religion tends to destroy government and degrade religion. So this wall of separation protects both the dangerous concentrations of power of government and religion combined. And George Carlin says he says, I'm completely in favor of separation of church and state. These two institutions screw us up enough on their own, so both together them is certain death. I think he got that right. I'm a little less cynical than that, but certainly, in some ways, because I have a little bit more faith in both institutions, both government, and I'm a little less cynical about all religions. I think that they can offer social stability and guidance, but the real danger is when they're combined. Here's a poem by the poet Yeats. It's called Church and State. Here is a fresh matter, poet, matter for old age meet. Might of the church and state their mobs put under their feet. But, oh, heart's wine shall run pure, mind's bread grow sweet. That were a cowardly song, wander in dreams no more. What if the church and the state are the mob that howls at your door? Wine shall run thick to the end, bread tastes sour. Wonderful. Our bread will taste sour if church and state get together, and I think that this, the idea of, I mean, you hear some conservatives say we need more religion in government. I think Scotty and I were talking about, well, how about Sharia law? Let's try that, right? We do like that government and religious combination. I do think that you have to remind people of the Inquisition Spain and Salem, Massachusetts, when they talk about how wonderful it is to have government and state together. So certainly, I think the origin historically is it was out there for protection of religious minorities. And that's why today I think we get a lot of the Baptist support for separation of church and state. De Tocqueville, actually, in his touring of the colonies, wrote quite a bit about talking to Congress, to clergy people, about the separation of church and state. And he's a great and astute examiner of American culture. He said that in speaking with clergymen, who are, quote, the depositories of various creeds, he heard them say that, quote, the main reason for the quiet sway of religion over their country was the complete separation of church and state. I have no hesitation in stating that throughout my stay in America, I met nobody, lay or cleric, who did not agree with that. That was the reason why American society was particularly nonviolent regarding religious clashes. We did have some, but not like Europe. I mean, my goodness, the religious wars in Europe were horrible. So both clergy and lay people said this. And certainly you can see the evolution of American history and what freedom of religion meant and what the First Amendment meant. At first, I will admit that many of the founders thought that it basically meant that you could be any Protestant sect that you wanted. See, we'll all get along. But as Catholics came into the country, it began to mean that you both were supporters of the New Testament. And when Jews added, people began to talk about how the First Amendment really was to protect anybody, the believers of the book. When Muslims began to come to the country, arguments began to be made, no, it's to protect monotheists. And then when you have Hindi, etc. And now you can use the First Amendment to defend humanists as well, which is why ethical culture, certainly there are 3 court cases that are pretty famous in the 50s and 60s. They were all based on First Amendment principle to support ethical culture, even though we're non-theist. So it's an practically it did expand to mean more and more and more. But I think it basically meant, given the diversity in the country, we have to make sure we protect all the religious minorities. I stood up on my couch, turning more recent history, the moment Obama, my wife went down to his first inaugural. I stayed at home. I wasn't going to deal with the crowds. I said I got the best seat in the house. When he said non-believers in that first inaugural address, I stood up and cheered. I was by myself. I did have a drink in my hand, but I stood up and shouted out. It was deeply disappointing in the second inaugural when he did not. That was very much not there. And
Did he not say freedom from religion in the second?
Did he? Okay.
I heard it.
Okay. I didn't.
From religion.
Good. Okay. He didn't say non-believers or atheists or skeptics or anything like that. He didn't refer to the people that he did. So I'm glad to see that. Let me go to a couple of other court cases that I think are valuable. And this gets a little sticky. In Everson versus the Board of Education in 1947, Robert Jackson came out and said that the wall's protection, he concluded that the government cannot aid all religions nor punish people for disbelief. And in 52 he wrote that the day this country ceases to be free for irreligion, it'll cease to be free for religion, except for the sect that can win political power. So he's really defending non-believers and atheists. It is disquieting to see that 3 decades later, Rehnquist on the court actually began to backpedal on that logic regarding the defense of irreligion. Rehnquist argued, nothing in the Establishment Clause requires government to be strictly neutral between religion and irreligion. Nor does the clause prohibit Congress or the states from pursuing legitimate secular ends through non-discriminatory sectarian means. Now, I don't quite get how non-discriminatory sectarian works. If you're not in any of the sects, you've already been discriminated against. But that's the logic that began to defend, or didn't begin, was involved in defending faith-based initiatives. Okay, so saying that you don't have to defend non-believers. So that combined with the rise of the more powerful fundamentalist forces in American politics in the 80s and 90s make me a lot more fearful that we've lost some of that clarity of the 50s and 60s. To a degree, I would be happier even if the court just came out and said, let's have a free market approach to religion. Let's just let them sink or swim on their own. In other words, take away free exercise protection. I don't want that, but there's some logic to this. Ben Franklin said it this way, and I love this logic. He says, when a religion is good, I conceive it will support itself. When it does not support itself, and God does not take care to support it so that its professors are obliged to call to help for the civil power, 'tis a sign I apprehend of it being a bad religion. In other words, if you really let things sink or swim and you don't call for the government to protect you, maybe that'll get rid of bad religions. You actually have to call on your God. Well, another irony is that when the religious powers in Europe gained more and more sort of public acceptance as being civic religions. So when the Church of England is the official church of the religion, scholars of religion actually come out and say that was the beginning of the decline of the popularity of religion, because people began to look at religion as just another bureaucracy of the government, that it was like civil service, that it could be ignored. And in fact, it was precisely the fact that religion stayed independent from government here that it is so vibrant in the United States. I mean, most of you know it, but a lot of people don't realize how secular Europe is. And one of the reasons is that government became sort of just mundane, part of the structure of bureaucracy. So that's an interesting argument to offer religious believers, that their vibrancy, the last thing you want to do is to become another branch of the government. And that's certainly something that I think, as I mentioned before, the Baptists were very involved with. It was in a meeting with Ed Joyce about 3 years ago when I listened to a couple of Baptist ministers. I didn't realize how fundamental to this battle the Baptists have been. They have always defended the wall of separation, and Thomas Jefferson, as I said, was involved in that. 1925, Scopes trial. It's useful for so many things. The Southern Baptist Convention came out and issued during that trial a statement of Baptist faith and message. And the clarity of its defense of the wall of separation is what I like so much. They said, church and state should be separate. The church should not resort to civil power to carry on its work. Real ownership of their own faith, and they came right out. During the 20s. I mean, the 20s was one of the most conservative backlash of religious voices you can hear. And the Baptists came out and just said, absolutely not. So there is a historical alliance between evangelicals, small churches, and even major churches, and liberal and progressive forces. And I think that story has to be told more, because it's just out of the picture. People really do like the culture wars of right-wing religious people and liberals who want to kill religion. Eva was speaking to a conservative religious person. I wouldn't necessarily choose Robert Ingersoll as my quote to convince them, but I love this quote so much. He said, he talked about how the writers of the Constitution were so wise. He said, they knew that to put God in the Constitution was to put man out. They knew that the recognition of a deity would be seized upon by fanatics and zealots as a pretext for destroying the liberty of thought. They knew that the terrible history of the church too well to place in her keeping, or in the keeping of her God, the sacred rights of man. They intended that all should have the right to worship or not to worship, that our laws should make no distinction on account of creed. They intended to found and frame a government for man and for man alone. They wished to preserve the individuality of all, to prevent the few from governing the many, and the many from persecuting and destroying the few. And Ingersoll was right. We need those sorts of speeches more today. I also like to point out, even though if you look at the responses of the candidates today, they act as if there is no litmus test for religion to be a candidate for office. And that's very clear, and yet, de facto, it seems like there is. It's important not to have a litmus test because we need the most capable political leaders we can get, regardless of their political affiliation. As soon as you start this litmus test, you leave out all these capable people. And George Washington, in fact, said that we benefited from that. He said, in the enlightened age, which was talking about 200 years ago, and in the land of equal liberty, our boast is that man's religious tenets will not forfeit the protection of laws, nor deprive him the right of attaining and holding the highest offices that are known in the United States. He came out and said, you can be an atheist and get elected. You can't do that anymore. That's kind of scary. So the delegates of the Constitutional Convention said that there can be no religious test required. That's also why in the Constitution, when they have the oath of the presidency, it says you can affirm rather than swear. Okay, that was a very clear and intentional. They put that word in the Constitution because they realized oaths are taken and swearing involves swearing to a deity. And you know which group in particularly lobbied for affirm? One particular group. Very local, the Quakers. Quakers argued. Because for them, even though many were theists, to swear is to claim that is to basically admit that you would lie if you didn't swear, which was a violation of their belief in the basic goodness of man. So now, certainly without that in the Constitution, people could have argued that Kennedy couldn't have been elected. When campaigning, he said he was proud to be in a country where no man is denied public office merely because of his religious difference. So today, I learned a lot in the last couple of years about the various ways to tell when that wall has been breached, and I think it's good if progressives know it better. There are three basic tests, and I'll try to go through these without too much academics, give the basics. The best is known as the Lemon test. Okay? Lemon versus Kurtzman was a decision in 1971 involving actually a member of the Philadelphia Ethical Society, Alton Lemon, who died 2 years ago, and I spoke at his memorial. He was given the 2003 First Amendment Hero Award from the Freedom from Religion Foundation for his work in that case, because he was arguing against Pennsylvania's use of public tax money for religious schools. In that case, the courts came out and said that in order to be constitutional, laws must have, in order for them to not be examples of unconstitutional breach of the wall, laws have to have a secular purpose, be neutral towards religion, not hindering or advancing religion, and not resulting in excessive entanglements between governments and religion. Okay, so secular purpose, neutral towards religion, and no excessive entanglements. In court cases, it's been very difficult to basically determine the purpose of any law, because that sort of implies motive, and that's actually one reason why the court started to not use the Lemon test, even though it was useful in many early cases. So Sandra Day O'Connor proposed a different one. The second test is called the endorsement test. It's a little simpler. And it just says that a law is unconstitutional if, in the mind of a reasonable observer, the government's endorsing or disapproving of religion. And this is particularly relevant when talking about government displays of religious displays of the holidays. That's used all the time. It was pretty clear in my mind that Westchester was endorsing the creche and the menorah when those were the only two evidence of that. So it's a reasonable person. So you don't actually have to say, well, what was your purpose? You can just say what a reasonable person would say. And that was pretty clear. Then in 1992, a third test was given. It was called the coercion test, and this was particularly useful for public school prayer issues. Justice Kennedy came out and said that you can't have prayers in public schools because even if the test, even if the prayer was not required, was the term a lot of religious people were saying, well, it's not required. But Kennedy said, baloney. Kids feel coerced if other kids are doing it in a setting. You can't tell a 12-year-old that when all your friends are saying the Lord's Prayer, that you're not being coerced. So that was useful. So all three of those tests are important, but none of them are clear. They all involve judgment, and that's why it's so easy to see this wall sort of being pushed back. So
What year was this, did you say? I'm sorry.
this was 92, that third test.
92,
Yeah,
he said that.
yeah, yeah. So, you know, the majority of the court said when the Lemon decision was passed that, quote, total separation is not possible in the absolute sense. So I stopped arguing that there's no religion in government. I mean, for example, to argue to a congressman that they can't say that they consult their faith tradition before they make a vote, that's a lost cause. A, how can you monitor that, right? And the courts wouldn't support it anyway. So it's not really a line. In fact, the court said total separation is not possible. Some relationship between government and religious organizations is inevitable. And the court said the line of separation, far from being a wall, is blurred, indistinct, and variable barrier depending on the circumstances of a particular relationship. That means every court case has to be monitored by progressive forces to make sure that in that particular case, these three tests are being applied in as vigorous a way as we can. Because it simply is not clear. And I try to, when I find somebody making very pat arguments, whether they're arguing on my side or not, I try to get them to slow down and realize that it is complicated. And the best thing to do is to back up and know the case that you're looking at. So when you have issues of government display of religious holiday symbols, or Catholic hospitals and institutions receiving government aid while denying birth control, or religion in public education, which I think is the most contentious in my mind, is thankfully we'll be able to celebrate a victory in December for the Dover case. But I do want to spend my last comments on education, because this to me is the most important, because you're talking about the next generation of voters. And the right wing is very good at framing issues in ways that work with their argument. They describe defenders of the wall as, especially within public education, as being hostile to religion. The first thing you have to say to them is, in reality, public school students are exercising their First Amendment rights to be involved in religion all the time. All the time, children are given classrooms for Bible reading classes. That's defended by the Constitution. They're given the right to say a silent prayer. They're given the right to meet at the flagpole and do a silent prayer at the beginning of the school. Private expressions within certain parameters that don't fall under the coercion tax should be and are protected. So the idea that there's no religion in school is purely false, and the Constitution is defending appropriate elements of that. But the public allocation of dollars for religious schools, I worry that that genie's out of the bottle, and that simply has to be opposed. I mean, we're draining public education funds, and that direct transition of taxed money through voucher schemes that a lot of the candidates now are supporting. The Grant administration opposed that. The Grant administration. We're talking 1870s. These are the words of President Grant. He said, encourage free schools and resolve that not $1 of money shall be appropriated to support any sectarian schools. Common school education should be unmixed with sectarian, pagan, or atheistic tenets. He's not taking a side, right? Leave the matter to religion, to the family altar, the church, and the private schools supported entirely by private contributions. Keep the church and state forever separated. It's 140 years ago, but we're back into this now. So we can't let down, especially given the diversity of public schools. I do think that's one of the quivers in our arsenal, is that arrows in our quiver, is that there's such great diversity that it's even more important to defend diversity in school now. And helping students say that they are non-believers or atheists is very important, because that's the only way that their legal rights are going to be protected. So making it safe for them. Religion too often, I think, closes the door in openness. I often make the argument that democracy survives when there is full and free discourse, and that means making sure that all voices of skepticism and free thought be allowed to be offered. The Anti-Defamation League said, quote, "Public schools mold children into good citizens by teaching them the core values of pluralistic democracy, freedom and tolerance. Our public schools must therefore be hospitable to students of all faith and no faith. Public schools should teach an understanding of and respect for diversity, as well as the spirit of acceptance and inclusion." I spent 25 years as a teacher, and I know that the quest for knowledge is much more productive when it's infused with liberating doubt. And a lot of people will say, my children are so confused, as if that's a bad thing. That's a great thing. Kids should be confused, because the world's confusing. And Socrates, I mean, okay, yeah, he was given hemlock because he did this, but I still think it was the best educational method. Get kids questioning everything. And in the end, they'll come back to what their conscience and reason and the evidence tell them. Dale McGowan, who is a great individual, written Parenting Beyond Belief, a wonderful book. He said, I don't want my children to be atheists because I'm an atheist. I want them to be whatever they are because they look at the evidence and they use their mind and make that decision. That's the basis of good education and good learning. That's the danger of the religious right getting involved in education, is they're shutting down freedom of thought in our schools. So, I guess I'll end with, I'll give you a quiz. This is the fact that our democracy is strengthened by pluralism is supported by this quote that I want to offer you. And I want you to tell me who you think it was. If you know, because you heard me say it before, don't answer. We in the United States, above all, must remember that we were founded as a nation of openness to peoples of all belief, and so we must remain. Our very unity has been strengthened by our pluralism. We establish no religion in this country. We command no worship. We mandate no belief, nor will we ever. Church and state are and must remain separate. All are free to believe or not believe. All are free to practice a faith or not. And those who believe are free and should be free to speak of and act on their belief. Who does know it? Don't say it yet. Nobody knows? Oh, good, good, good. Yeah?
I'll take a guess at Jefferson, though.
Sounds like Jefferson.
Sounds like him. He's
Yeah,
wordy
yeah.
and Lincoln.
It could have been Lincoln. Yeah, yeah, but it was 1984.
Orwell.
Reagan. That was Ronald Reagan. You see how far we've come from that level of conservatism? Isn't that bizarre? Now, I don't know whether he really believed it. Politicians say what gets them what they need at the moment. But this was a public speech. This was something he said, and you can find on the public record. So if he can do that, if Robert Taft, Mr. Republican, do it, we have to look for conservatives who support separation of church and state and get the lunatics out of this conversation. All right, I'll stop there. And as I said, use these quotes, email me, I'll send them to you. So, conversation?
You brought up Baptists a few times, and
Yeah.
I wanted everyone to know that that in Americans United's leadership organization, where all the chapter leaders are involved, we meet once a year in Washington, D.C., and there's a strong showing of Baptists. It's almost funny, you have a room full of atheists and Unitarians and non-denominational people, and then all of a sudden some really hardcore Baptists. And we all sit together and we all share the exact same views on separation of church and state, and it's really wonderful.
But they're not at the open bar.
No.
Yeah, should I?
I just have a question. What would happen, or does it happen, that people who are in court proceedings refuse to swear on the Bible? And what if you were asked to stand up and swear the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I'm sure it's happened, and I'm sure they get away with it. I don't know. My wife says I say this way too often. This is the skill of a high school teacher. You act as if you know, but you don't really.
Never heard of a court case?
Should I Google it?
I know that usually
You don't have to swear.
you have to arrange with the judge beforehand.
Yeah.
Let the judge know that if you swore an oath to God, you'd be perjuring yourself, and that you need to affirm that you will tell the truth. And they don't make you use a book, and they usually make you put your hand up. Now, my son was just in traffic court the other day and had to swear, so help him God, and he just did. He didn't feel like messing with it at all. He just wanted to get out of court. So I don't think a lot of people bring it up, but if it's important to you that you are giving your honest testimony and swearing on the Bible is not what you want, you can bring it up to the judge. And usually they accommodate you without any fanfare.
And in Philadelphia County, I've done jury duty a couple of times, and they just don't ask, they don't have any Bible, they just ask you to affirm, basically.
I just want to throw this out there because it's my favorite. Most of you probably know this, but when Representative Keith Ellison, one of our 2 Muslim representatives, was swearing for his confirmation, he wanted to do it on the Quran, and right-wing conservatives said, "How dare you?" And I mean, think about the twisted logic. You want me to swear on your Bible, even though I'm not a Christian? I mean, that's a bizarre use of your holy book. So you know what he ended up doing? He got from the Library of Congress Jefferson's Quran to swear on. Which I think is wonderful. Sandy.
On this question of swearing, you mentioned that Quakers had an objection, even Quakers who are theists had an objection to swearing. I have not heard of that before, and I'm puzzled by that. Do you know anything more about that? What that was really about?
This was something way back that I read 30 years ago when I was teaching, and I thought it was that the assumption was that if you were swearing, it's an admission that in other cases you would lie, and that's basically telling the person you're a liar, because without this you would lie. This is needed to coerce you to tell the truth.
The logic of that doesn't.
Well, it's basically an insult to Quakers who believed that they said they would never lie. I'm sure.
There's an expression, don't swear, too. I mean.
Oh, not that they don't swear. I mean, they didn't doff their hats because it assumed an inequality between people. So that was seen. They were knocked down in the streets for that when they didn't doff their hats. So that was a part of it. Welcome. No. And I've said everything I was going to say, but if you want me to send you this, grab my card and I'll send you my comments from today. So I don't know more than that, but
Okay.
you got to follow another one?
I have another
Okay,
question.
let me go Scott, then I'll come back to you.
First.
Yeah.
I'd like to know your opinion on the impact of In God We Trust and Under God. I see it as quite harmful. I just was reminded of it this morning when I was watching TV. Someone was a supporter of Ben Carson who doesn't want people to vote for Muslims for president.
Right.
And she said she agreed with him on that because we're one nation under God, not under Allah. It's also In God We Trust has been used as like against atheists because we are one nation under God. You're not really patriotic or really American if you don't believe in God. And I see it as very harmful. It gives a false idea of what it means to be an American, and it's inaccurate because not all of us as American citizens believe in God or trust in God or think we're under a God.
So we can do what Margaret Downey does. And everything she crosses out In God We Trust on all her bills.
Oh, so do I.
I actually have sort of a list of sort of what my priorities are in fighting for church-state separation, and that's pretty low down, but I don't want to rule it out as important. I mean, one issue that you've been involved with that I put high on the list is when parents deny their children life-saving treatment due to religious conviction, and that, to me, is just an example of child abuse. So,
I would like to see the clergy be held accountable for being reckless and teaching that in the first place.
Right. No, it's so, I don't know how pernicious In God We Trust is. the T-shirts that we're making up right now, they should be available in about a month at the Ethical Societies, is one of my, that was actually on a PA, non-believers T-shirt. Brian Field said, sure, use it as in good we trust. So I kind of like the fact that in God we trust is everywhere, because now that T-shirt is I think, a better T-shirt, because in good we trust works.
Freedom from
Did you
Religion
ever say
Foundation, reason
dog
we
is my
trust.
co-pilot?
Dog is my co-pilot, right?
Dog is my co-pilot, I like that one.
Freedom from
Dog is
Religion Foundation has a
Yeah.
reason we trust.
Oh,
A
yeah.
lot of people that sticker to that, dog is my co-pilot.
It irritates me too. I was a teacher for 22 years, and when I said the pledge every morning, I never said under God. Nobody ever saw it. Never in my life, I mean, in my adult life, have I or will I say that?
Yeah.
It's not me.
When and if I ever am saying a Pledge of Allegiance, I always say in good, under good.
Oh,
Under good.
I never thought of that.
I just add the O.
Just leave it
So,
out.
and actually, that's kind of, it is kind of interesting, because ethical culture uses the expression, we spell God with 2 O's and the devil with no D. We'd like to think it was ours, but it was actually, again, early Unitarian circles. We traced it back to that in the early 1800s. Yeah.
Well, I was just wondering, based upon what you just said, if anybody else remembers this, but, you know, you were talking earlier about school and education and having, but I remember, well, there was the Pledge of Allegiance, you know, under God, you know, you had to say that and it always made me feel uncomfortable when I was in grade school. And also, they used to have some more explicit things, and being of a Jewish background, they used to have, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was it said Jesus Christ. I remember it said Jesus Christ. And I remember saying to a teacher, and felt comfortable with that, they said, well, just, you don't have to say it.
Right. Coercion.
Blank it out. But do other people remember? I mean, I'm kind of old. Do other people remember being in school and having to do this? Well, not as old as you. But you know, I think some of you were
Yeah,
younger.
yeah.
But do you remember this in school in Philadelphia? I went to school
Sure.
in Philadelphia.
Yeah. Pledge of
And we used to
Allegiance.
have to do this.
Yeah.
It was very uncomfortable when I was young, and I could really relate to what you said. It was very uncomfortable.
And quite often you'll have people saying, well, it's been here since the founding of our country, right? Point out, it was Eisenhower's Cold War element.
I was just
Yeah,
wondering,
go ahead.
does anybody know the history of the
Yeah.
Pledge of Allegiance?
Yeah.
When did it start? Because I have objections without the under God in
Yeah.
there. I really resent
Having to-
anybody telling me I'm obligated to take an oath of allegiance,
Right, right.
to prove my loyalty to my country.
Like a Quaker.
Bring it to my attention if I violate the laws or if I'm disrespectful of principles of the government or whatever it is that we stand for. But don't ask me to take an oath of allegiance. I think that the history of oaths of allegiance, not good. It tends to be abusive.
Right, right. Yeah, I don't know the history of it. I just know the insertion of "in God" during the Cold War. Yeah.
I was just wondering if you could expand on what you were saying about Eisenhower, because I'm not aware.
It was just during the Cold War, one of the elements of the propaganda war is godless communists. And in order to try to win over public opinion, there was a very concerted effort to try to infuse in sort of American values, Christian values, that we're a good young nation of Christian values and that the communists are godless. And that sold well. It was used by McCarthy's allies.
And it wasn't until the 1950s that under God was put into the pledge,
Right.
and it wasn't until the 1950s that in God we trust was put onto currency, although it was on
Right.
coins since the Civil War.
But it was part of a very explicit strategy aimed at the Soviets. That's what a lot of people don't realize. I don't know about on the dollar, but in the pledge, there's historical data that shows that they said, let's do this because this will emphasize our anti-communist position.
And it's kind of ironic that it comes right before indivisible, because you're kind of dividing people by putting the God in there, but not everyone.
Right. Right. And it's ironic that when you look at the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, the first 2/3 is very similar to the United States Constitution, and the last third is very similar to the Soviet Constitution, because that's where they say guarantee the right to education and health care and all these wonderful things, and that came straight from the Soviet Constitution. You give people a test, like what Constitution says people should have guaranteed education. Most people think it's the US Constitution. It's not, it's the Soviet Constitution. Not that I'm a communist. No, that's a bad thing. It's a bad thing. Other thoughts or comments? Sandy?
The tradition of our president praising God in public speeches, how long ago did that get started? And my sense is that it's an obligation that any president that refuses to do that is going to suffer severe political consequences. Does anybody know what that is?
Fairly recently, I'm not sure though.
I know when you read the founders, they're constantly evoking the deity. I mean, so,
Lincoln was too.
yeah. I mean, I don't think it had the pernicious effect because it was not part of a political agenda. It was more just like a cultural water that we were in a way. And there was greater respect for not actually defending religion with government power. But it's very sad, you know, and God bless America. Like, my question always is, and who do you not want God to bless? I mean, when you say God bless America, what are you not saying? Reminds me of a poem by Mark Twain called The War Prayer that he asked not to be published while he was alive because only dead men tell the truth, he said. And it's a wonderful poem. Look it up. But it's somebody comes in a church and says it's describing a scene on the eve of the Mexican-American War, and the churches, everybody's in the church, and the young recruits are all dressed, and the drums are beating, and all of that, and they're praying, you know, Lord, save our, keep our children safe as they go off to war, and so on and so on. And this prophet walks up and says, "You have said one prayer, but you've only said half of the prayer." He says, when you say, save our children, you're saying blast their children to pieces. And it's an incredible piece. But that's quite often. Look, whenever somebody says that, you always have to say, okay, what are you leaving out? It does strike me odd. I will sometimes say this. I say, when you describe who you are, what's the first thing you're going to say? What's the list? How do you describe who you are? And it depends on the context, but the amount of times people would say, American is really high up there, even before like human being, is interesting. I mean, the 20th century was the century of nationalism, and I don't know if we're past it, but there's so much power that the jingoism is so powerful. Unfortunately, I think it's being replaced by global capitalism. So.
That's not just in America, though. Maybe
all over.
Absolutely. The biggest problem is it's happening all over the world, and in countries where people used to get along with each other, they now want to disrespect their neighbors, and secession movements have grown. There's over 100 of them that are active right now in the world. We did a discussion group on why people can't get along, and we had some interesting lists of all the places where there's civil war and almost civil war, threats of civil war, terrorism, violence, and all sorts of things. There have been some interesting compilations of that published that really bothered me a lot.
It's not though just post-colonialism. I mean, that's what it makes, and I think
that's some of it. Some of it is still that.
Right.
It just goes way beyond that. This is people, who there are small states that can't get along with your neighbors who used to get along just fine. The deterioration of, let's put it another way, the lack of tolerance for people who are not you. The differences that we object to seem to get more and more trivial. That we come from a different ethnic tradition, that's easy to understand. That we're different color, that's easy to see those differences. That we have different religions, that's easy. But that we just belong to different clans in the same place and can't get along, and this trend of breaking apart is a nationalistic trend as I see it. I think what that trend is important in this country. That's just part of a larger epidemic of people not being able to, or not being willing to accept their neighbors.
Perhaps. Let me ask, yeah.
Is the laws for separation of church and state in the U.S., are they proposed to be the same on all three different levels, federal, state, and city? Or can the city and the state opt out of certain ones and things like that?
Generally, yes, they can opt out as long as the federal court system doesn't get involved. I mean, in order, if a municipal government or a state government violates what most reasonable people would say is the wall of separation, they can do that as long as they're not called up to task, so somebody has to litigate. So if the ACLU or the Southern Poverty Law Center or some other group doesn't pick it up, it can remain on the books. It takes a plaintiff. So.
And they have to have standing.
They have to have standing, right? It can't be from the outside. It's got to be somebody being harmed in that locale. So yeah, and it happens all the time. And one of the things I was saying in my talk is it's very messy. It's not a clean line. It's a lot of judgment calls, and it changes. So, I was going to just say maybe sort of to move us on towards a conclusion or whatever. And do, if you need to leave, it's fine with me. Don't feel like you have your caption in here. But what you think is the most important issue, or what you're most invested in regarding the separation of church and state? You know, are there things that you are involved with or most concerned about that you want to share with other people?
I think I'm most concerned with the desensitivity to, the way church and state has come together. I've gotten into debates even with people who are not religious, who kind of welcome the Pope with open arms because of the nature of his message. So, at least if there's still walls that are up about the whole thing, then at least there's a dialogue that can be had. And those walls start breaking down and people all over are not really seeing how they're coming together. That's more trouble.
Yeah, I agree with you. The whole Pope mania was an interesting thing because I saw some of my very good atheist humanist friends were gaga. And I get it. I mean, I was torn. I mean, I do want to encourage that. But I remember saying that, the amount of tax dollars paid out for his trip. Now, some people said, no, the council, the meeting of the families is paying for all of Philadelphia. But he didn't, show me the money. I'd be surprised if they foot the full bill, because we're talking about millions of dollars, but not D.C. and New York.
Well, exactly. That's the point that I was hearing a lot of justifications for that had to do with something of that exact kind of nature, where in areas where people would have immediately had their red flags on, like what's going on here, it just, people were kind of okay.
Just the fact that the Vatican is considered a country. You could fit the Vatican, inside city center 40 times. It's tiny, but they're protected by diplomatic laws. They have arrangements with countries all over the world where those countries are bound by international law to give money to the Vatican. Haiti is sending money to the Vatican.
That's horrible.
It is horrible. It is horrible. and the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, and money is going out to a place that has gilded, toilet. No, it doesn't have gilded toilets.
Other than religion, what do they get back?
But Haiti does have official, Catholic religion is real big there, and it's like their official religion, actually.
It can
And
be
that
big, but it should be taken money.
That and voodoo.
Other people's thoughts or concerns or thoughts.
Well, if nobody else wants to add anything, I'll tell you what bugs me, and it's getting more and more important to me. I no longer want to support freedom of religion. I think that freedom of religion needs to be conditioned. There are religions whose principles are to destroy other religions and are not willing to accept pluralism. And I don't think we have an obligation
could be a fun discussion.
We need a whole other meeting for this, Sandy.
Yeah, that would be a
Yeah, I
full
think we
meeting.
will do it. I'll do this at the Thinking Society. As a
Yeah.
matter of fact, maybe we'll do it together with, we're looking for a topic to do another
We did a
joint
little bit,
program with the Ethical
The
Society.
limits of toleration.
Maybe that's where we ought to go, but the trouble with it is, I don't see anybody writing about it, I haven't seen anybody talking about it. It's just too far out there, I think, and,
Be sure you get a Unitarian minister involved, okay?
well, we'll get you involved anyway.
I can fake it, but
An interesting aside about that would be, say, a group like UCLA, the ACLU, and sorry, I know it's getting that mixed up, and their desire to allow the Nazis, was it the Nazis?
yeah, in
The Nazis
Skokie.
to march,
Yeah.
or the Ku Klux Klan, I forget,
Right.
or all of them actually,
Right.
because they believe that stopping one is
Right.
is against the whole thing.
Right.
So I
That's what I'm
just
talking
couldn't
about, very
find-
good, there's a good example, thank you.
Just could counteract what you're
Yeah,
saying,
yeah.
but it is an interesting topic.
Yeah.
Because on the other hand, I mean, I really feel like there are some very hateful religious groups that are very detrimental, but yet we as a society have this obligation to have this freedom of religion, and I think that it's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
It could have harmful effects.
I'll say two things, and I don't want to go too far down this road because it is. I don't know enough about it to begin with. But the free expression. I mean, one of the things that I do feel that seems a little disingenuous is if Klansmen are going to march with their hoods on, I would argue that's not free expression because they're anonymous. Then the whole issue, obviously, of inciting violence, but it's difficult. Because when are you going to say this is too hateful a group? Do you have to prove inciting violence? That's a tough one. But you had a second. Yeah.
My concern was education and the vouchers, things like that.
Yeah.
That's dismantling the education in the country. It's taking money away from where it should be. I mean, it's already unequal. You got cities who don't have enough money, tax base, to get a good education, and you have the rich towns who can. But vouchers are going to pay for others.
Can I make a comment about that? Just what you're saying, an interesting thing that I know because I worked for the Philadelphia School District for many years, and what they did was that they sold off the schools that were more valuable, and they sold them off to private concerns, like a school, like one school had air conditioning put in, the principal used all the money to fix it up, the school was in nicer shape, and all these students now have to go to a school that's just falling down horrible, because this property was worth more than that property. So the kids are really getting screwed, like in the context of that, just to add what you're saying. And it's really not nice that these kids have to go to school with walls falling down, and they came from a school where they had an air conditioner in their room.
Yeah,
I mean, it was in a slum, but it had an air conditioner in the room.
I feel clearer about the religious schools getting tax vouchers. I feel like there's no way that can be justified. 5 years ago, I would have been a lot more sort of against charter schools that are not religious. I do think that we're done. We're past that. We're not going back. Charter schools are going to stay, and it's kind of like it's almost no use trying to defend the public school system anymore. I mean, it's tragic. New Orleans is 90% charter schools. DC is 42%. Where I live, 42% charter. I mean, that's.
And their outcomes are terrible. Their education outcomes are no better than public schools.
I think that's probably true. I wasn't going to say they're terrible,
But
there's not.
they're no better. There's no benefit.
Well, they
New Orleans may
cherry
have gotten
pick.
rid of some. They haven't improved in New Orleans, but they may have gotten rid of some of the worst. There's a lot of the most poor have migrated
Right.
Yeah, but wait a
to
minute.
Baton Rouge and to Houston.
Here's the problem, is that they have And the same with the Christian schools, they have some place to dump people, they dump them in the
Right,
public schools,
exactly.
and they make themselves look better, so the
Exactly.
charter schools do that too, so that's BS.
Yeah, yeah.
It's all
So it's not
BS.
charter schools, it's not equal access.
That's right, exactly, it's
Thank
not
you
like
very
they
much.
have to
You're
take
Right.
handicapped kids, the Catholic schools can look better because they don't have to take handicapped kids. So if kid misbehaves, they can push them out, and the same with the charter schools. And charter schools should be made to go under the same rules as the public schools, and it's
If
not.
they're getting the money, they should be, yes.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I
if
might feel really strongly.
you watch, yeah, I mean, a lot of people will quote Waiting for Superman. Watch the film, The Inconvenient Truth About Waiting for Superman.
That was
Which
good.
it's very good. It debunks
Yeah.
a lot of the lies in Waiting for Superman. Scotty?
I can point out a couple of things, like ISIS and Al Qaeda. They're religious organizations in a way. They do cite the Quran. But they are groups that they don't allow complete freedom to do, because their means that they specify is violent,
Well, but
conquering.
I think you can label them as terrorist organizations, and you
Yeah.
don't have to worry about the freedom of religion.
Yeah, but they do take a religion. They cite the Quran.
Sure.
So.
Sure, sure, but a lot of terrorists.
But for the groups like the Skokie marchers and all, at what point do they become labeled
Right,
terrorists?
right, that's muddy.
No.
Yeah. Is it imminent? Imminent threat?
And also you talked about concerns. A large concern I have is this big religious freedom movement that is being used as a justification to discriminate against people. That especially into like small communities, like little gay children and lesbian children that are growing up in small communities, and they got to have these religious bigots that want to use their religion as a reason to discriminate against poor little children.
Yeah.
And we hear it on the Republican side all the time. Religious freedom, but what
Right.
about freedom not to be unjustly discriminated against?
Right. Yep.
As soon as that's a case-by-case basis on that,
Right.
you know.
Right.
Well, thank you guys. It's been very entertaining. I'm sorry you missed the beginning of it. But it's on video, and it'll be on our YouTube channel in a couple of days. So everyone say thanks to Leader Hugh.
Thank you. This is an important battle.